During the period spanning 1942 to 1945 in the Pacific Theater of Operations, the dense, tangled vegetation of the Pacific Islands presented a singular combat landscape. Engagements frequently unfolded at distances no greater than 30 yards. Within these confines, the United States Marine Corps introduced a firearm that would fundamentally disrupt the assumptions held by Japanese forces regarding contemporary warfare: the 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. While detailed accounts of its specific combat deployment remain scarce, the presence of Winchester Model 1897 and Model 1912 shotguns within Marine units throughout the Pacific campaigns represented a tactical asset for which Japanese military planning had made no allowance. The Imperial Japanese Army had dedicated decades to preparing for conflict with Western powers. Their instructional materials detail British rifles, American machine guns, French mortars, and Soviet submachine guns. However, shotguns, perceived by them as implements for fouling rather than instruments of war, were conspicuously absent from their tactical considerations. This oversight would prove consequential, as American forces deployed approximately 25,000 Model 97s and between 60,000 and 80,000 Model 12s into military service during the Second World War. In 1942, Japanese military doctrine was founded upon the principle of spiritual fortitude overcoming material deficiencies. This philosophy was not merely propaganda, but a deliberate response to their industrial realities. Japan produced less steel in an entire year than America manufactured in a single month. The Imperial Army's strategy was to cultivate superior close-quarters combat proficiency in each soldier, where spirit and training would triumph over mechanized conflict. The practical application of this doctrine involved night infiltration assaults followed by close-range engagements with rifle and bayonet. Japanese infantry underwent extensive training in these tactics, which had proven effective against Chinese forces, British troops in Malaya, and American defenders in the Philippines. The typical engagement sequence was clear: approach under the cloak of darkness, infiltrate enemy positions, and then overwhelm the defenders at close range, where Japanese superiority in hand-to-hand combat was expected to be decisive. American shotguns rendered this entire tactical framework obsolete. At the very close ranges where Japanese doctrine anticipated dominance, a Marine armed with a Winchester Model 97 could discharge 6 loads of triple-aught buckshot in approximately 2 seconds, leveraging the weapon's slam-fire capability. Each shell contained 9 pellets, each measuring 0.33 caliber, creating a spread pattern that made missing virtually impossible within the dense jungle growth. The Winchester Model 1897, a design by John Browning refined over 45 years of production, served as the primary Marine shotgun during the early Pacific campaigns. The military variant featured a 20-inch barrel, a perforated heat shield, and a bayonet lug compatible with the M1917 sword bayonet. Crucially, the Model 97 lacked a trigger disconnector, enabling continuous firing by holding the trigger down while operating the pump action. The Model 1912, engineered by Winchester's T.C. Johnson, improved upon Browning's design with an internal hammer mechanism that prevented accidental discharge. By 1943, the Model 12 had largely supplanted the Model 97 in Marine units, though both firearms continued in service throughout the war. Military procurement records indicate consistent production, although specific deployment figures in combat remain undocumented. The ammunition these weapons fired proved as significant as the firearms themselves. Standard triple-aught buckshot loads contain 9 pellets, each weighing 53 8/8 grains and measuring 8 38 thousandths of a millimeter in diameter. At 10 yards, the pattern spread to approximately 10 inches. At 20 yards, 20 inches. At 30 yards, 30 inches. In jungle combat, where visibility rarely extended beyond 30 yards, this expanding pattern compensated for the challenges of precise aiming amidst dense foliage. The Guadalcanal campaign, from August 1942 to February 1943, marked the initial major American offensive in the Pacific. Marines of the 1st Division landed equipped with various armaments, including some shotguns, though their precise numbers and deployment are not recorded in official battle reports. The Battle of the Tenarue River, more accurately Alligator Creek, on August 21, 1942, saw Colonel Kona Ichiki's 917-man detachment virtually annihilated, with 789 Japanese killed. While this engagement is prominently featured in accounts of the Pacific War, primary sources attribute the Japanese losses primarily to Browning M1917 water-cooled machine guns and 37mm anti-tank guns firing canister rounds, with only passing reference to shotgun usage. Throughout the Guadalcanal campaign, Marines utilized shotguns primarily for perimeter defense and jungle patrols. Photographic evidence depicts point men armed with Winchester shotguns during patrol operations, positioned to counter ambushes in the dense jungle terrain. However, after-action reports overwhelmingly focus on machine guns, rifles, and artillery as the principal weapons influencing battle outcomes. The jungle environment of Guadalcanal presented unique challenges for all weapons, but especially for shotguns. The standard paper case shotgun shells absorbed moisture in the humid climate, swelling to a point where they would not chamber properly. This issue would persist throughout the Pacific campaign until the adoption of brass case shells. The humidity of the Pacific Islands created a critical ammunition problem that nearly negated shotgun effectiveness. Standard commercial shotgun shells utilize paper casings that readily absorbed moisture, swelling in the 100% humidity common in jungle conditions. Shells that chambered easily in dry conditions became impossible to load after exposure to tropical dampness. Marines reported shells swelling so severely that they had to be hammered into chambers, an obviously impractical measure during combat. This crisis persisted until March 29, 1945, when the military officially adopted the all-brass M19 shell, designated shell shotgun, brass 12-gauge number 00 Buck M19. These moisture-resistant brass cases restored shotgun reliability for the war's final months. The late adoption date explains why many Pacific veterans rarely mention shotguns in their memoirs. For most of the war, ammunition issues severely hampered their effectiveness. The United States military formalized shotgun training through Technical Manual TM9-285, published on September 21, 1942. This manual covered the Winchester models 97 and 12, the Remington Model 11, the Stevens Models 520 and 620, and the Ithaca Model 37. Marine training took place at Camp Pendleton, California, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and Parris Island, South Carolina. Training emphasized specific combat applications, such as point security during patrols, rapid engagement in night defense, cave and bunker clearing procedures, and prisoner guard duties. Marines learned the Model 97's unique slam fire technique, although instructors cautioned against over-reliance on this feature due to ammunition consumption and barrel overheating. The Marine Corps Table of Organization E-100, effective from 1943, authorized 306 shotguns per Marine division. These weapons were distributed primarily to military police companies, pioneer battalions, and selected rifle squads for specialized assignments. This allocation meant that while shotguns were present in every major Marine operation, they constituted less than 2% of a division's small arms. Historical records reveal a striking absence. Japan never filed formal diplomatic protests regarding American shotgun use, a stark contrast to Germany's September 1918 complaint that shotguns violated the Hague Convention. German protests during the First World War had asserted that shotguns caused unnecessary suffering and threatened to execute captured Americans carrying them. Captured Japanese military documents from during and after the war make no specific mention of shotguns requiring special countermeasures. Training materials focused on countering American firepower generally, machine guns, artillery, and flamethrowers, but never identified shotguns as necessitating specific tactical responses. This omission suggests that while individual Japanese soldiers undoubtedly encountered shotgun fire, the weapons never achieved sufficient tactical impact to warrant official attention. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers similarly lack references to shotguns as particularly problematic weapons. Officers discussed American material superiority, overwhelming firepower, and effective combined arms tactics, but shotguns appear nowhere in these assessments. This silence in the official record stands in marked contrast to extensive Japanese documentation concerning countermeasures against American flamethrowers, which did prompt specific tactical adaptations. The New Guinea campaign, from 1942 to 1945, saw both Army and Marine units operating in some of the war's most challenging terrain. The 32nd and 41st Infantry Divisions requested shotguns based on Marine experiences at Guadalcanal, the dense jungle of New Guinea, where visibility often measured in single digits of yards, theoretically presented ideal conditions for shotgun employment. However, the same ammunition problems that plagued Marines at Guadalcanal proved even worse in New Guinea's highlands. The combination of constant rain, river crossings, and extreme humidity rendered paper case shells almost completely unreliable. Units that had requested shotguns often left them in rear areas, relying instead on M1 Garands, Thompson submachine guns, and Browning automatic rifles. The Army's experience in New Guinea demonstrated that weapons effective on paper did not always translate to combat effectiveness in practice. While shotguns excelled in training exercises and controlled conditions, the harsh reality of jungle warfare exposed critical limitations that would not be resolved until the arrival of brass ammunition in 1945. As the Pacific War progressed, Marine units developed specific tactical doctrines for shotgun employment. The weapons proved most valuable in three distinct roles: point security during patrols, perimeter defense against infiltration, and prisoner guard duties. For patrol operations, designated scouts carried shotguns as lead elements, prepared to counter ambushes with immediate, devastating firepower. The spreading pattern of buckshot could suppress multiple enemy positions simultaneously, allowing the patrol to deploy while the pointman maintained fire superiority. This tactic demanded extensive training and trust among team members, as the shotgunner operated well forward of mutual support. Night perimeter defense represented another specialized application. Marines positioned shotgunners at likely infiltration points, where the weapon's spread pattern compensated for poor visibility. The distinctive sound of a pump-action shotgun being cycled served as both a warning and a psychological deterrent to infiltrators. However, limited ammunition capacity meant shotgunners required immediate rifle support once engaged. The October 1944 return to the Philippines saw the 6th Army request substantial shotgun allocations for urban combat in Manila. However, Marine participation in the Philippines ground campaign was minimal, primarily limited to artillery support and air operations. The Army's 37th Infantry Division, which bore the brunt of the Manila fighting, employed shotguns in house-to-house combat, although after-action reports emphasize flamethrowers and demolition charges as the primary weapons for reducing Japanese strongpoints. The urban combat in Manila demonstrated both shotgun capabilities and limitations. In room-clearing operations, shotguns provided devastating close-range firepower. However, Japanese defenders quickly learned to barricade themselves in positions that prevented close approach, negating the shotgun advantage. The weapons proved most effective in surprise encounters rather than deliberate assault operations. The February 1945 invasion of Iwo Jima theoretically saw 3 Marine divisions fielding 918 authorized shotguns. However, the island's volcanic ash, tunnel systems, and fortified positions created combat conditions where shotguns played minimal roles. The famous flag raising on Mount Suribachi occurred after flamethrower and demolition teams cleared Japanese positions, not after shotgun assaults. Marine units at Iwo Jima primarily employed flamethrowers for cave clearing, with specialized flame tanks providing support. The M2-2 flamethrower could project burning fuel 40 yards into cave complexes, far exceeding shotgun range. Of the 26,000 American casualties at Iwo Jima, existing records attribute none specifically to the absence of shotgun firepower or failures in shotgun tactics. The adoption of brass ammunition arrived too late to significantly impact Iwo Jima operations. The M19 brass shells reached some units in late March 1945, after the battle's conclusion. This timing meant that Marines at Iwo Jima still struggled with swollen paper shells, further limiting shotgun employment in one of the war's most intense battles. The April to June 1945 Battle of Okinawa saw the full implementation of lessons learned throughout the Pacific Campaign. The 1st and 6th Marine Divisions theoretically fielded 612 authorized shotguns, now supplied with reliable brass ammunition. However, the battle's character, fought largely in open terrain against prepared defensive positions, offered limited opportunities for shotgun employment. The Japanese 32nd Army on Okinawa had adopted a defense-in-depth strategy, avoiding the banzai charges that had characterized earlier battles. Japanese forces occupied fortified positions in the Shuri Line, fighting from bunkers and cave systems that kept American infantry at extended ranges. In these conditions, Marine units relied primarily on coordinated tank infantry tactics, with flamethrower tanks providing close support. Where shotguns did see use at Okinawa was in the final stages of position reduction, when Marine squads cleared surviving Japanese from captured fortifications. The weapons also served military police units managing the massive civilian population movement. However, these applications, while important, represented a small fraction of the overall combat effort. Despite extensive documentation of Second World War combat, specific accounts of shotgun employment remain surprisingly rare. The Library of Congress Veterans History Project contains thousands of Pacific War interviews, yet mentions of shotgun combat are scarce. The National Museum of the Pacific War holds over 4,000 oral histories, but detailed shotgun combat accounts are nearly absent. Eugene Sledge's memoir, With the Old Breed, considered one of the finest Pacific War narratives, never mentions shotguns, despite his service in a rifle company at Peleliu and Okinawa. Robert Leckey's Helmet for My Pillow similarly omits shotgun discussion, despite his service with the 1st Marine Division at Guadalcanal. These omissions from detailed, comprehensive memoirs suggest shotguns played peripheral rather than central roles in the Marine combat experience. The few available references describe shotguns as valuable for specific situations, but not as primary combat weapons. Veterans recall appreciating shotguns for night security and jungle ambushes, but emphasize rifles, machine guns, and mortars as the weapons that determined battle outcomes. This perspective aligns with official records, showing shotguns comprising less than 2% of division armament. American industry produced substantial numbers of military shotguns during the Second World War. Winchester manufactured approximately 25,000 Model 97s and between 60,000 and 80,000 Model 12s for military contracts. Remington, Stevens, and Ithaca contributed additional thousands. This production capacity demonstrated American industrial might, but does not necessarily translate to combat employment. Many shotguns served in training facilities, guard units, and rear area security rather than frontline combat. The military police required shotguns for prisoner management and convoy security. Navy vessels carried shotguns for boarding operations and security duties. Air bases employed shotguns for perimeter defense. These necessary but non-combat roles absorbed much of the production. The disconnect between production numbers and combat accounts suggests that while America possessed the industrial capacity to arm every Marine squad with shotguns, practical limitations, ammunition problems, tactical constraints, and doctrinal preferences meant most remained in secondary roles. The shotgun served as a specialized tool rather than a standard combat weapon. To understand the shotgun's actual role in Pacific combat, comparison with other weapons proves instructive. The M2 flamethrower, introduced in 1943, appeared in virtually every account of cave and bunker clearing. Marines at Iwo Jima employed 27,000 gallons of flamethrower fuel, with detailed records of its effectiveness. By contrast, shotgun ammunition expenditure records remain conspicuously absent from the same reports. The Browning automatic rifle, or BAR, served as the Marine Squad's base of fire, with extensive documentation of its employment and effectiveness. Every Marine rifle squad included 3 bar teams by 1944, with detailed training programs and tactical doctrine. Shotguns, despite their theoretical authorization, never achieved similar doctrinal integration or combat documentation. Even the relatively rare M1918 Browning machine gun generated more combat accounts than shotguns. Veterans describe specific instances of Browning gun employment, ammunition, consumption, and tactical impact. The absence of similar shotgun accounts suggests their actual combat use remained limited, Despite official authorization and production numbers, the disconnect between shotgun mythology and historical reality reflects broader patterns in Second World War historiography. Popular culture, influenced by films and sensationalized accounts, has elevated certain weapons beyond their actual significance. The shotgun, with its dramatic visual impact and devastating close-range effect, naturally attracted such mythologizing. Post-war films depicted Marines clearing Japanese positions with shotguns, creating lasting public impressions unsupported by primary sources. Video games and popular histories perpetuated these images, establishing shotguns as iconic Pacific War weapons despite limited documentation of their actual employment. This myth-making process obscures the more mundane reality of their primarily auxiliary roles. The mythology serves narrative purposes, providing dramatic close combat encounters and technological contrasts between American and Japanese forces. However, historical accuracy requires acknowledging that, while shotguns were present and occasionally effective, they never achieved the tactical significance of rifles, machine guns, mortars, or flamethrowers in determining battle outcomes. The few documented veteran accounts of shotgun use provide valuable insights into their actual employment. Marines who carried shotguns recall them as useful for specific situations, but burdensome for general combat. The weapon's weight, limited ammunition capacity, and specialized role meant many preferred rifles for routine operations. A Marine veteran interviewed in 1985 recalled carrying a Model 97 on Guadalcanal. "It was good for night watch and jungle paths," he stated, "but you couldn't engage at range. When the shooting started, you wanted a rifle." This practical assessment reflects the weapon's limitations in varied combat situations. Shotguns excelled in their niche but couldn't serve as primary armament. Another veteran from the 2nd Marine Division described shotgun allocation. "Each squad was supposed to have one," he recalled, "but half the time it stayed with the company gear, too specialized for everyday use." This comment illustrates the gap between official authorization and practical employment. Units possessed shotguns, but often found rifles more versatile for routine operations. The introduction of brass-cased M19 ammunition in March of 1945, while intended to resolve the persistent moisture-related issues that had plagued shotguns throughout the Pacific War, arrived too late to meaningfully alter battlefield engagements. By that March, the island of Iwo Jima had been subdued, and the invasion of Okinawa was merely weeks away. The campaign in the Philippines had largely concluded, leaving subsequent engagements in the Pacific to be fought with established military strategies. Nevertheless, this brass ammunition did prove its worth in occupation duties and for the anticipated invasion of Japan. Military strategists preparing for Operation Downfall had requested substantial quantities of shotguns for urban warfare within Japanese cities. The deployment of atomic weapons rendered this requirement obsolete, leaving the combat efficacy of the brass ammunition largely unverified in actual conflict. Subsequent post-war evaluations indicated that had the brass ammunition been available earlier, shotgun effectiveness would have been dramatically enhanced. However, such hypothetical scenarios cannot redefine the established historical record. For the majority of the Pacific War, shotguns were severely hampered by critical ammunition reliability problems, which significantly curtailed their battlefield utility. The absence of any specific Japanese defensive measures against shotguns offers crucial historical context. Japanese forces had developed detailed responses to various American armaments that profoundly affected combat operations, such as overhead cover against mortars, concealed emplacements against tanks, and reverse-slope defenses against naval bombardment. The lack of comparable shotgun countermeasures suggests that these weapons never attained a similar level of tactical importance. The evolution of Japanese tactics during the Pacific War centered on mitigating American material superiority through the strategic use of terrain and the creation of defensive depth. The transition from coastal defenses to inland fortifications, the development of intricate tunnel networks, and the eventual cessation of banzai charges were all reactions to American firepower in general, rather than to specific weapons like shotguns. Post-war Japanese military analyses thoroughly examined American tactics and weaponry, but made scant mention of shotguns. These studies meticulously documented American artillery coordination, naval gunfire support, and the integration of tanks with infantry. The omission of shotgun analysis from otherwise comprehensive reviews implies their minimal impact on Japanese strategic thinking. One of the most revealing aspects of the shotgun's narrative is the complete absence of statistical data. World War II generated vast amounts of information, including ammunition expenditure figures, casualty correlations, and studies on weapon effectiveness. Yet, no reliable statistics exist that link shotgun deployment to enemy casualties or tactical outcomes. The Operational Research Section, responsible for analyzing weapon effectiveness throughout the war, produced detailed studies on artillery, mortars, and small arms, quantifying hit probabilities, casualty rates, and ammunition efficiency. No comparable shotgun studies are found in the archives, suggesting insufficient combat usage to generate statistically meaningful results. Even anecdotal estimates are absent from the historical record. Veterans readily recall the number of rifle rounds expended, grenades thrown, or mortar shells fired. Similar shotgun statistics are not found in memoirs or interviews. This void in quantitative data indicates that shotguns remained peripheral to primary combat operations, despite their theoretical presence within Marine units. The extensive shotgun training provided at Marine camps fostered expectations that combat experiences did not fulfill. Marines were instructed in slam-fire techniques, practiced jungle shooting scenarios, and qualified with both buckshot and slugs. This training suggested that shotguns would play significant roles in combat. However, the realities of warfare diverge considerably from these training simulations. The controlled environments of Camp Pendleton did not replicate the humidity of Guadalcanal or the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima. Training targets did not retaliate, nor did they necessitate engagements at extended ranges. The close-quarters encounters that dominated training proved to be less frequent than anticipated in actual combat. This disconnect between training emphasis and combat deployment mirrors other experiences from World War II. Bayonet training consumed considerable time, despite minimal use of bayonets in combat. Preparations for chemical warfare proved unnecessary, as gas attacks never materialized. Similarly, shotgun training prepared Marines for combat scenarios that rarely unfolded as expected. The logistical difficulties associated with shotgun ammunition supply further constrained combat deployment. Each 12-gauge shell weighed approximately twice as much as a rifle cartridge and occupied 3 times the volume. A Marine could carry 80 rounds of rifle ammunition within the space and weight allocated to just 36 shotgun shells. Supply vessels prioritized rifle ammunition, machine gun belts, and mortar shells over specialized shotgun loads. The limited cargo capacity of landing craft meant that every ammunition case required substantial justification. Shotgun shells, serving specialized functions, received lower priority than general-purpose ammunition. These logistical constraints meant that even when shotguns were available, ammunition supplies remained scarce. Veterans recall receiving only 1 or 2 boxes of shells, which had to suffice for entire operations. This scarcity discouraged liberal use, further diminishing the shotgun's combat impact below their theoretical potential. Military planners anticipated shotguns would excel in urban combat, prompting requests for increased allocations prior to the battles in Manila and Naha. The confined spaces, short engagement distances, and the necessity of clearing rooms seemed ideal for shotgun deployment. However, actual urban combat revealed unforeseen limitations. Japanese defenders in Manila and Naha established kill zones that prevented close approaches. Barricaded positions, interlocking fields of fire, and booby traps forced American forces to engage at ranges exceeding the effective distance of shotguns. The devastating firepower that theoretically made shotguns ideal for urban combat proved irrelevant when Marines could not close to effective range. In instances where close-quarters urban combat did occur, veterans report utilizing grenades, Thompson submachine guns, and flamethrowers instead of shotguns. These weapons offered comparable close-range effectiveness with greater versatility. The Thompson's 30-round magazine capacity far surpassed the shotgun's 6 rounds, proving crucial in sustained engagements. While shotguns left a minimal documented impact on Japanese military thinking, they achieved a disproportionate cultural significance within American military lore. The imagery of a Marine with a trench gun clearing Japanese positions became iconic, despite a limited historical basis. This cultural impact surpasses the weapon's actual combat contribution. The shotgun came to represent American pragmatism, the utilization of hunting implements for military purposes, irrespective of European military traditions. This narrative resonated with the American self-perception as practical innovators, unburdened by conventional military thinking. This mythology also served propaganda objectives, even if combat reality proved more complex. Japanese military culture focused on rifles, machine guns, and artillery as legitimate military weapons, never incorporating shotguns into their conceptualization of warfare. This cultural blind spot supposedly left them unprepared, although the historical record indicates their lack of preparation stemmed from the shotgun's limited actual deployment rather than a mere oversight. The story of the shotgun exemplifies the intricate relationship between technology and military doctrine. The weapons themselves functioned as designed, proving devastating at close range with spreading patterns ideal for jungle combat. However, their successful deployment necessitated specific tactical conditions that rarely materialized in actual combat. Marine doctrine evolved throughout the Pacific War, yet shotguns never achieved full integration into tactical systems. They remained supplementary weapons for specific situations rather than integral components of squad firepower. This doctrinal marginalization reflected practical combat experience rather than technological limitations. The contrast with the successful integration of other weapons is instructive. The bar became central to Marine squad tactics, with detailed doctrine for its employment. The flamethrower revolutionized bunker clearing, prompting extensive tactical development. Shotguns, despite their theoretical potential, never inspired similar doctrinal evolution. Military administrative records offer another perspective on shotgun deployment. Requisitions, repair reports, and replacement requests document weapon usage patterns. Rifle and machine gun parts appear consistently in supply records, indicating heavy use. Requests for shotgun parts, conversely, remain notably infrequent, suggesting limited wear from combat employment. Armorer reports from Marine divisions show similar trends. Rifles and machine guns required constant maintenance due to combat use. Shotguns primarily needed cleaning to address storage corrosion rather than firing wear. These maintenance patterns indicate that most shotguns spent more time in arms rooms than in active combat. Ammunition requisitions tell a similar story. Divisions requested millions of rifle rounds and hundreds of thousands of machine gun rounds for operations. Shotgun shell requests were modest, often designated for training rather than combat consumption. These administrative records corroborate the limited combat deployment suggested by veteran accounts. The experiences of other nations provide context for evaluating American shotgun deployment. British and Australian forces in the Pacific possessed few shotguns, relying instead on rifles and submachine guns for jungle warfare. Their combat effectiveness without shotguns suggests these weapons were not essential for success in the Pacific. Soviet forces, engaged in diverse terrain from urban Stalingrad to rural Kursk, never adopted combat shotguns, despite massive small arms production. Chinese forces, fighting in close quarters throughout their war with Japan, similarly did not employ shotguns, despite a desperate need for effective weaponry. This international perspective suggests shotguns represented one tactical option among many, rather than an essential combat capability. Nations achieved similar combat outcomes through different weapon combinations, indicating that the shotgun's tactical impact remained marginal despite American production capacity. Post-war military analysis evaluated World War II weaponry for future conflicts. The Army's Infantry Board conducted extensive studies to determine which weapons warranted continued development. Rifles, machine guns, mortars, and recoilless rifles received priority. Shotguns garnered minimal attention, suggesting their World War II performance did not justify significant investment. The Korean War saw limited shotgun deployment despite extensive close-quarters combat. Marines in Korea carried M1 Garands, BARs, and carbines rather than shotguns for patrol duties. This practical choice by combat veterans of the Pacific War signifies their assessment of the shotgun's actual versus theoretical utility. Vietnam would witness a resurgence in shotgun use, particularly modified commercial models for jungle patrols. However, even in Vietnam's close-range combat, shotguns remain specialized weapons for point men and tunnel rats rather than standard armaments. This pattern persists today, with shotguns serving specific military roles rather than general combat functions. The historical record supports several conclusions regarding Japanese encounters with American shotguns in World War II. Firstly, while shotguns were present during the campaigns, their actual combat deployment was limited due to ammunition's preferences and doctrinal considerations. The March 1945 adoption of brass ammunition arrived too late to significantly influence combat operations. Secondly, Japanese forces never developed specific countermeasures against shotguns because these weapons never achieved sufficient tactical impact to warrant special attention. The absence of shotgun references in Japanese military documents, training materials, and post-war analyses indicates their marginal role in determining combat outcomes. Japanese tactical evolution responded to American firepower in general, rather than to specific weapons like shotguns. Thirdly, the discrepancy between authorized shotgun numbers and documented combat employment reveals the gap between theoretical capability and practical utility. Although Marine divisions were authorized 306 shotguns each, most were relegated to secondary roles such as guard duty, training, and rear area security rather than frontline combat. Veteran accounts, when they mention shotguns at all, describe them as useful for specific situations, but not as primary combat weapons. Fourthly, the mythology surrounding Pacific War shotguns exceeds their documented historical impact. Popular culture has elevated shotguns to an iconic status despite limited primary source evidence of their combat effectiveness. This myth-making obscures the more mundane reality that rifles, machine guns, mortars, and flamethrowers were the weapons that determined battle outcomes. While shotguns filled specialized niches, the shotgun narrative offers broader lessons regarding military innovation and adaptation. Technical capability alone does not guarantee tactical impact. Weapons must be integrated into doctrine, logistics, and training to achieve combat effectiveness. Shotguns possess theoretical advantages but failed to overcome practical limitations that restricted their employment. The Japanese military's failure to anticipate shotguns proved irrelevant because shotguns never achieved the tactical impact to exploit this oversight. Their lack of preparedness reflected an accurate assessment of the shotgun's marginal role rather than critical oversight. The weapons that actually determined Pacific War outcomes, artillery, naval gunfire, aircraft, and flamethrowers, received appropriate Japanese attention. American industrial capacity to produce thousands of military shotguns demonstrated manufacturing prowess, but did not directly translate to combat power. The ability to manufacture weapons outstripped the ability to employ them effectively in Pacific conditions. This disconnect between production and employment illustrates that industrial might alone does not guarantee tactical advantage. The narrative of Japanese infantry encountering American shotguns in World War II ultimately reveals more about military mythology than combat reality. While shotguns were present and occasionally effective in specific circumstances, they never achieved the devastating tactical impact that popular accounts suggest. Japanese forces were indeed unprepared for shotguns, but this unpreparedness proved largely irrelevant because shotguns played marginal roles in determining battle outcomes. The verified historical record, including production figures, training manuals, and organizational tables, confirms the presence of shotguns within Marine units. However, the absence of detailed combat accounts, statistical documentation, and Japanese countermeasures indicates their limited actual deployment. Veterans who carried shotguns recall them as specialized tools useful in specific situations, rather than primary combat weapons that altered battle outcomes. The March 1945 adoption of brass ammunition resolved the critical moisture problem, but arrived too late to affect major Pacific battles. By the time reliable ammunition became available, the war had essentially been decided through island-hopping campaigns that relied on combined arms tactics, overwhelming firepower, and naval supremacy rather than close-quarters shotgun engagements. The Japanese military's lack of a specific response to shotguns reflected an accurate tactical assessment rather than a critical oversight. They correctly focused on countering the American weapons that truly determined battle outcomes: artillery, naval gunfire, aircraft, and flamethrowers. Their close-range superiority, while acknowledged, never achieved sufficient tactical impact to warrant dedicated countermeasures. Modern military forces continue to employ shotguns for specialized roles, such as door breaching, deploying less lethal ammunition, and addressing specific close-quarters situations. This limited contemporary use more accurately parallels their actual World War II deployment than popular mythology suggests. These weapons serve important but narrow purposes rather than functioning as primary combat arms. The transformation of limited historical reality into extensive popular mythology illustrates how war stories evolve beyond their factual foundations. The dramatic image of Marines with shotguns clearing Japanese positions appeals to narrative needs that historical accuracy does not satisfy. The mythology serves cultural purposes, demonstrating American pragmatism, technological adaptability, and combat innovation. Even if the historical record proves more mundane, understanding the actual role of shotguns in Pacific War combat requires separating verified history from accumulated mythology. The weapons were present, authorized, and occasionally effective, but they never achieved the tactical significance that would justify their prominent place in popular Pacific War narratives. Japanese infantry may never have anticipated 12-gauge American shotguns in their assaults, but this surprise proved largely irrelevant to battle outcomes determined by superior American firepower, logistics, and combined arms tactics. The verified history presents a less dramatic but more accurate account. Shotguns served as specialized weapons for particular situations, hampered by ammunition problems until late in the war, employed primarily in secondary roles, and never achieving sufficient tactical impact to significantly influence Pacific War outcomes. This reality may lack the dramatic appeal of mythology, but it represents the historical truth that emerges from careful examination of primary sources, veteran accounts, and military records. Ultimately, the story of Japanese forces encountering American shotguns reveals as much about military myth-making as it does about actual combat. The weapons achieved a cultural significance that transcended their tactical impact, becoming symbols of American pragmatism and firepower, despite limited documented evidence. This disconnect between mythology and reality serves as a reminder that popular military history often emphasizes dramatic narratives over mundane historical truth. The Japanese infantry, who never anticipated 12-gauge American shotguns in their assault, were right to be surprised by their presence, but wrong to fear their impact. The weapons that actually defeated Japanese forces in the Pacific, overwhelming industrial production, superior logistics, coordinated combined arms, and relentless naval power, proved far more decisive than the occasional blast of buckshot in the jungle. The shotgun story, properly understood, illustrates not American tactical innovation through unexpected weapons, but rather the complex relationship between military capability, combat employment, and historical mythology in the Pacific War.